Touchdown BC is sponsored by
the Robertson Braun Group, Remax Kelowna. Thinking real estate in Kelowna? Think Blake Robertson, Marlene Braun. For more information, call 250-212-2888 or 250-878-5242.
Touchdown BC is also sponsored by Subway and the Subway Bowl. The Subway Bowl hosts and supports the BC High School Football Championships and amateur football around the province.
Welcome to Touchdown BC. I'm your host, Adam Kordick, and joining me as he does ever so often is my co-host, Ty Clark. Ty, what do we have in store today?
Oh man, we got another big week ahead of us here. We got a bunch of action going on in the community. We got the Subway High School football report. You can't forget about UBC's homecoming game. And of course, a bunch of action going on in BCFC.
Now let's not wait any longer. Time to get into the action. Time now for the Subway BC High School football report. This past weekend marked the end of exhibition play. With conference play set to begin this weekend, teams had one last game to work out the kinks before they play games that really matter. This past weekend, we had everything: upsets, rivalries, and blowouts. Let's get right into it.
STM taking on Vancouver College. First cue, Irish get on the board first. Michael Lee gets the handoff, makes a couple guys miss early, and he is just too quick. Michael Lee will be a player to watch this year in the AAA. He is in for the major. Irish up 7 just before half. Eddie Gonzalez makes this field goal to go up 10. Early third, Lee is at it again. This time he goes right up the gut, untouched, and he will score for the second time in the game. Later, BC would add a field goal to go up 20-0 after 3 quarters. Don't count STM out though. In the fourth, Colby Bolshevik finds his running back Tyler Eckert for the score to make it 20-8. 17 seconds left in the game, the Knights would find the end zone again. This time, Bolshevik will hit Mateo Carteri to make it a 6-point game. STM's last hope is for an onside kick, which is unsuccessful. BC over STM 20-14. Hansworth taking on Carson Graham. The battle for North Van supremacy is underway. Hansworth sets the tone early by going up a score, but Carson Graham would respond. Sterling Story hands it off to Max Goodman, and the big man does the rest to tie things up. Royals not calling it quits just yet. Sam Thole tosses out wide. Looks like it's a reverse, but they will pull off the flea flicker to perfection. Thole finds his man wide open, in stride, and Hansworth creeps back in front by a touchdown. Carson Graham's turn now, and the resilience pays off. Max Goodman goes up the gut for his second touchdown. Hansworth goes back to it, not wanting to let this one slip away. Sam Thole's QB sneak is successful. Not to be outdone, Carson Graham gives it to their big enforcer Quinton James, who smashes it in to tie it up. Hansworth would go ahead, but this is when Carson ties it up. Hansworth rallied with another TD, and Carson with a shot to win it. The Royals D comes up big to win 33-28. Kelowna versus Rutland. Opening kickoff, Nathan Tonagai grabs the ball off the hop and looks for room. Bounces it outside, down the sideline, and he is gone. The Rutland defender tries to catch him, but Nate is just too quick, finishing in the end zone like Usain Bolt. Kelowna wouldn't be done there. A couple drives later, QB Marcus Athens hits Quinn Large for the major. Rutland would make some moves later in the game. Zachary Hemmett takes the snap and throws a beautiful ball before getting hit to Kyle Tolo, who makes the catch for 6. The Owls would be too strong though, scoring on this tipped pass. Kelowna beats Rutland 27-18. Notre Dame versus Holy Cross, all Notre Dame in this one. They start off by scoring on this 5-yard run, and in something I haven't seen before, the Notre Dame Jugglers get 2 pick sixes back-to-back on 2 back-to-back drives. Notre Dame 19, Holy Cross 8. Now let's take a look from the scores around AAA. Going into the first week of conference play, our TDBC top 5 remains the same as last week. Mount Doug at number 1, Vancouver College at number 2, New West at number 3, Terry Fox at number 4, and STM at number 5. Langley taking on West Side in the first. Langley's pivot, Colton DeJong, hits his teammate right in the numbers, and his receiver would do the rest, taking it down the sidelines for the score. West Side would only be able to manage 1 touchdown in this one, coming from their running back. DeJong was money in this one, tearing up the D for touchdowns through the air all day. Langley wins this one 49-7 over West Side. Now let's take a look at the scores around AA. Shout out to Eric Hamber Zane Luxison, who had a great game. He had 3 tackles and 1 sack. The high school game of the week has the Carson Graham Eagles traveling to New West to take on the New Westminster Ajax on Friday. Kickoff at 7:30 at Mercer Stadium. This game will be streamed live on sportscanada.tv.
Time now for the BC High School Football Report. Joining me this week is Jason Quinter, longtime coach in BC High School, most recently with Abbotsford last year. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Jason, let's get right into it. Right now, it's already been 3 weeks into the season. Obviously, some teams have played 2 games, some teams have played 3 games. Are there any surprise games or games that you like in the first 3 games of the season?
AAA has been pretty much as we expected. I mean, you have the dominant teams with Mount Doug, Vancouver College, Terry Fox, obviously, and then you've got some teams to watch, Notre Dame, St. Thomas More, but it's mostly the usual suspects, the teams that you would expect. There's a couple sleeper teams with Lord Tweedsmuir and maybe a Belmont coming out of the blue, but other than that, it's exactly what we expected.
And now to this AAA, I know you're a big fan of Mount Doug, and I believe too that even though that some people might not want to give them that number 1 ranking, it's hard not to think that they're the best team just because you can't say it until the playoffs end and they're not in the hunt anymore.
Well, and you know, they're the champions. So until somebody beats them, I think they deserve to be there. And from my perspective, they're the only team without a noticeable weakness. Every other team has something about them that they're lacking. They may be minor, but they're there, whereas Mount Doug, there's nothing.
And now this past last week, we saw the rep by population rule come into effect. We saw Abbotsford moving to AAA 2 games into exhibition play, and then Salmon Arm moving down, as well as Argyle.
Right.
What are your thoughts? And take us through kind of what that means for the AAA and the AA.
Well, it's a tough break for Abbotsford because it takes them from being a consensus championship contender and returning to the championship game again this year to being in a dogfight just to qualify for the playoffs. For Argyle and Salmon Arm, it helps them. And for whatever reason they did it, I don't know the reasons behind it. I'm sure they had their reasons. It is what it is, and those teams have to adjust, and they need to adjust the schedule. So it'll be interesting to see what direction they go with the schedules and who's going to be changing games.
And now looking to the AA, now without Abbotsford there, it's easy to say that Abbotsford was the perennial favorites in the AA. Now, is it kind of fair to say that it's kind of up for grabs?
It's totally up for grabs, and even more so when you consider that John Barsby suffered a loss to Vernon this past weekend, which puts Vernon in a really good position because I think they're for real. John Barsby's still a very good team. Also, you have Seacklem, who's made huge moves. You've got Hugh Boyd, that's been really good, and GW Graham, as good as they are, have been rough so far this year, so we'll have to see how they round into form as well. But yeah, one other team I want to mention too is Windsor. Windsor's quite good. They're very young, very talented. Just the question will be with depth with them and with Holy Cross to see how they hold up through the year.
And a AA team that you really like is led by a quarterback that actually was in grade 12 last year, but has come back on a medical redshirt. Just explain about that and Moxon as the QB of Hugh Boyd.
Yeah, Tyler Moxon had a medical redshirt granted just before the season began. He blew out his knee before last season, so it was well before the season. And it was unfortunate because he's such an immensely talented kid, really likable kid too. And he's a true leader and a dual threat guy, so he's fun to watch. So it's good for BC high school football in the sense that it makes everything more interesting when he's out there, and it brings Hugh Boyd back up to contender status where they belong. But how it worked out and how they made that decision, I don't know.
And now I know you make rankings for CIS teams or for all the best grade 12 students playing again in any position. Can you take us through not even about position, but just take us through your top blue chip players that a lot of teams are going to be trying to get this guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where the CIS programs are looking for not just talent, but intangibles and also measurables. So for quarterbacks, you're looking at a Jacob Samuel out of Vancouver College, or a Sam Thole, who's really developed out of Handsworth, or Gabe Oliveras is another one, Jaden Shanley out of Terry Fox. So for quarterbacks, that's the kind of thing you're looking at. Linemen, you're looking at kids like David Edwards out of South Delta, who's been just phenomenal. It's a really deep group this year for offensive linemen. So you've got, in addition, David, you've got Liam McCormick out of GW Graham, you've got Dante Bull out of Belmont, and on and on and on. Jeremy Cancalango is probably the top running back. Grant McDonald, a stud linebacker out of South Delta. Now, he got injured on Saturday. I don't know how bad that is. Hopefully it's not. Stephen Moretto out of Notre Dame, who's probably going to be playing baseball in the future, but phenomenal talent. So it's a long list. There are a lot of really good players out there right now. Depth is pretty good, but it's really developed with CIS taking it more seriously. You saw Regina bring in more guys from BC this year. Saskatchewan brought more guys in. Alberta brought more guys in. UBC obviously very active, but more of the CIS programs reaching out and bringing BC kids out. And I was at the UBC game against Regina on the weekend, and Andrew Becker, who came out of Rutland High School last year, ended up playing most of the game when they had injuries, and he played really well.
And now, going into conference play this week,
Right.
If you were to say two teams in the finals, AAA, going into conference play now, this early in the season, who would you take to be in the finals and also maybe winning it?
Well, it's tough because the conferences are really unbalanced talent-wise right now. You've got the one side that's got Mount Doug and Vancouver College and all these other strong teams, and then the other side you've got Terry Fox, and you've got a tough, young St. Thomas More team. But there isn't the same level of talent on that side, so you're most likely going to see Terry Fox come out of there. And my guess on the other side is probably going to come down to Vancouver College versus Mount Doug, and whoever comes out of that will be on the other side.
Well, thanks, Jason. Learned a lot.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the future.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the BC High School Report with Jason Quinter.
Week 3 of community football is in the books. Man, I love watching these guys play. Let's take a look at the action from this past week.
North Surrey taking on the Valley Thunder. And right out of the starting blocks, North Surrey sets the tone with a big hit in the backfield. Later that drive, Jerome Ahanmwango on the draw bursts through a seam on the left side, and he'd find some twine. Ahanmwango scampers in untouched for the score, putting North Surrey ahead. Next cue, Tigers take their offensive pursuit to the sky. Isaiah Anderson drops back and finds Chris Kongbo on the fade pattern. North Surrey makes it look easy and goes ahead by 2 scores. Anderson finds his boy Chris Kongbo up the gut once again. Tigers go ahead by 3 TDs. Still in the same quarter, the Tigers go back to the air, but this time it's Matthew Laline. Third quarter now, Anderson pump fakes and he decides to take it himself, and the kid's got some wheels. He falls a couple blocks and bursts to the outside, about to score, but pop! He gets hit from Justin Crooks at the goal line. Anderson shakes off the hit and would deliver a beautiful pass in between 2 defenders right to Michael Backwalk. And that would set up a field goal to put the Tigers way ahead in this contest. Believe it or not, North Surrey wasn't done there. Anderson drops back and finds a wide open Christopher Martin, who basically just walks this one in. North Surrey would get another field goal before they put this game to bed with Ethan Yip picked down the end zone. Tigers win 41-0. And now a quick look at the scores from Bantam this past weekend. Here's a look at the Bantam standings. Midget scores from this weekend have North Langley top Victoria 38-7, Langley dismantle Vancouver 49-0, and North Surrey says goodnight to Coquitlam 33-zip. Midget standings have the Stampeders, Bears, and Kodiaks all undefeated, while the Falcons, Spartans, and Warriors are still looking for that first win. And without further ado, here are the scores from Junior Bantam.
Week 8 is in the books, and what a wild weekend it was in the BCFC. 2 Prairie Football Conference teams visited the BCFC to mark the first 2 ever crossover games. With each team looking to finish the season strong, who would prevail? And would the battle between the West Shore Rebels and the VI Raiders end in a tie?
The West Shore Rebels tied. Yeah, I said it, tied. 25-25 with the VI Raiders. The Raiders had a chance to win it on a field goal with seconds left, but missed. the Raiders held Jamel Lyles to 118 yards rushing, and Raiders QB Jake LeBurge threw for 328 yards. With the tie, the Rebels move to 6-1-1 and now have sole possession of first place in the BCFC. They will travel to Langley this weekend for first place on the line. The Raiders go to 3-4-1. With the tie, the Raiders clinch a postseason berth, and they will host the Okanagan Sun this Saturday in Nanaimo. The Langley Rams were just too strong for the Kamloops Broncos. The Rams QB Tommy Robertson in his first start passed for 3 touchdowns and 242 yards en route to a 34-10 win over the Broncos. With the win, the Rams move to 6-2 and will host the West Shore Rebels this weekend for first place in the BCFC on the line. The Broncos drop to 1-7 and will host the Valley Huskers this Saturday in Kamloops. The Saskatoon Hilltops came into Kelowna and beat up on the Okanagan Sun in the first ever CJFL cross-conference game, 58-2. Okanagan struggled all game long to get their offense going. With the loss, the Okanagan Sun dropped to 6-2 and will visit the VI Raiders this Saturday in Nanaimo. The Valley Huskers lost their 8th game of the season against the visiting Winnipeg Rifles, 35-0 under the rain. The Rifles were led by running back Michael Rashad, who rushed for 225 yards and a touchdown. With the loss, Valley drops to 0-8 on the season and will travel to Kamloops this weekend to play the Broncos. Now let's take a look at the standings. The Rebels are on top with a record of 6-1-1. Only a half a game behind sit the Rams and the Sun, followed by the Raiders at 3-4-1. The BCFC's Offensive Player of the Week for Week 8 is Langley Rams quarterback Tommy Robertson. Robertson against the Broncos was 16 for 27 with 242 yards and 3 touchdowns. The BCFC's Defensive Player of the Week is VI Raiders defensive lineman Mason Kelly. In a tie against the Rebels, Kelly had 7 tackles and 2 sacks. The BCFC Special Teams Player of the Week is Langley Rams kick returner Jordan Lund. Lund returned a missed field goal 111 yards for a touchdown against the Broncos.
Following a national title, UBC's homecoming has been the talk of the town for weeks. Fresh off a disappointing loss to the Calgary Dinos last week, how would the Birds respond against a surging Rams team? Let's check it out.
UBC's 2016 homecoming game against the Regina Rams, and the home crowd is fired up, seeing their national champs take to the field, and this one was lit before kickoff. UBC down 3 before the first half, before the Birds block a punt deep in Rams territory. Colton Zaishley is able to take advantage of the turnover and pounce on the loose ball, putting the Birds ahead 10-3 going into half. Beginning of the third, Rams run with a 4 wideout set, and they start to pick off UBC. Noah Picton looks within the family tree and finds Mitchell Picton to tie it up. And just like they practice in the backyard, Noah finds Mitchell once again on the easy out to go ahead 17-10. The brothers Picton win it for the Rams 20-10. It was a rough outing for Michael O'Connor, who had a pretty successful day besides the 2 interceptions. Besides Will Watson and Marcus Davis's 80-plus yards receiving, it was a pretty quiet day for the Thunderbirds. Here's what T-Birds head coach Blake Neal had to say after the game.
Score a touchdown, right? And we left a defense that's, is playing their guts out. We all know the situation on defense, and again, it's just like last week. They hung in there long enough for us to win, and that's what's disappointing. Is we were in a position to win the game again, and we didn't make the plays at the right time. To win some games. I wasn't brought to UBC to lose football games. I'm not going to lose football games. So.
UBC's next game will be on the road this Saturday when they take on the Alberta Golden Bears at 4 p.m. Pacific time.
Welcome to the UBC Report. Joining me in studio as he does occasionally, whenever he wants.
Whenever I feel like it.
Whenever he feels like it. Is Mr. Jim Mullen. Jim, this was the homecoming game, the big game. UBC started off the game. They got a nice little fumble recovery in the end zone to go up 10-3 into half, and they didn't really do much after that. What happened?
Well, it was nice to see special teams step up in a big way, especially after seeing them get burned in their game against the University of Calgary the previous week at McMahon Stadium. The offense, for one reason or another, has been completely off kilter. One of the major reasons for that is the lack of a running game. They have the third worst running game in the CIS, not just the Canada West these days. It's similar somewhat to last year. It took the Thunderbirds about 4 games to find out what their running game was all about. And, after that, we know what the story was. At one point, they actually had the second worst running game in the entire nation last year. So there's lots of room for improvement in that. They finally started Liam Mahara, Vancouver College grad, at running back. He brings more size to the position. He was a UBC Thunderbird 3 years ago, transferred to Western, came back to UBC last year, and wanted to make sure the effects of a concussion were worn off. He's back to 100%. He could be the guy that replaces Brandon Deschamps at running back, and that's what they need. They need a balanced attack on offense. Also, I think in terms of their receiving core, some of those receivers need to finish off some routes or run them better. Not every pass that falls incomplete or is even an interception is necessarily Michael O'Connor's fault. O'Connor hasn't shown the energy that I think that we saw out of him in the final 5 regular season games of last year in the playoff run. But certainly there's lots of room for improvement on the offensive side of the ball.
Exactly, and statistically speaking, Michael O'Connor didn't actually have a bad day. He was a 67% completion rate. He threw for nearly 350 yards. That second half interception there at the end, would that be his fault? Can you take this blame on O'Connor's shoulders?
Well, it's hard to tell unless you really break down the film from a coaching perspective. And maybe it's one of the passes like we saw in the exhibition game against Manitoba that he would probably love to have back in terms of trying to force the play up the field and trying to create something out of nothing. Certainly he has a lot of confidence in the way that he can place the football in a pretty tight window. He's got the skill set. It's just a matter of time, though, for this team, I think, because, at one point, Gord Randall, who's been in this chair before, pointed out that UBC was 2 of 6 in the red zone. Only 45% of the time have they gone into the red zone throughout the course of this year and come out with a touchdown. That's a number that has to improve. They have shot themselves in the foot time and again on the offensive side of the ball, not just through interceptions, but through fumbles, not converting third down, you name it. And you know what? A lot of that gets back to the running game, and some of it gets back to the offensive line as well. I think that Steve Barato and Bob Beveridge, who are in charge of the offensive line, are a little disappointed with the way that it's developed so far. And I think you can expect to see some big improvements on that based upon what we saw last year and how they pulled this team together. Yeah, they lack some veteran experience at some key places. Certainly not on the offensive side of the ball. The defensive side of the ball, maybe some concerns there with a veteran presence, but the defense is coming around quite well too. I was actually quite impressed with what they were able to pull off against Regina Rams team that got Atlee Simon back, the leading rusher in the Canada West last year, and he was healthy. And you've got Noah Picton, who was averaging 490 yards passing over 2 games and was the CIS Player of the Week on the offensive side of the ball. So if a defense like that can keep a team contained to 20 points, then your offense should be able to put 22 to 28 up and win football games.
Yeah, and you know what? The Regina Rams did look pretty impressive in their own right, so we have to give them some credit. What was Stephen Bryce's game plan? Did he see some things that Calgary was doing different against UBC in his plan for the Thunderbirds?
Well, I think at this stage for Stephen Bryce, he would probably prefer to focus on what the Regina Rams can do properly or improperly. And we saw how he adjusted to kind of old school Rams football when Atlee Simon went down with an ankle sprain in the second quarter of their season opener up in Saskatoon. They went straight back to the passing game. The Rams have a great lineage of receivers. They go back to Jason Claremont, Jordan Cisco, Getzlaff. I mean, the list goes on and on. McConkey, their offensive coordinator, is the all-time leading receiver in Canada West history. And they've had some great quarterbacks there as well over the years. So they just opened it back up to the passing game. But when they brought Atlee Simon back on board for this game against UBC, that allowed them to have a bit more of a balanced attack. And quite frankly, I think there were times there where I think Noah Picton and the offense wished that they could kind of abandon some of the running game and go back to the air again, because they had some issues as well.
You know, after 2 straight losses, it might be a pretty favorable schedule for the Thunderbirds, playing Alberta again, who's probably the weakest team in the Can West. What is UBC going to have to do to change things up and get another win in the bag?
Well, they're going to have to shut down the rushing attack of Alberta that hurt them a lot in the first half, as I just alluded to. I would think that Alberta is a pretty frustrated football team right now after going into Manitoba and losing by 30. They're better than an 0-3 team in the CIS picture of things, but within Canada West, this is a conference where all the teams recruited well over the last 2 years. That includes Alberta, and it's hard to find a win here if there's an element of your game missing. They were planning on having a different starting quarterback there, and they were planning on having maybe the best receiver returning to the Canada West into their lineup in Jimmy Ralph. And he's decided in his 4th year of school to dedicate himself to school because he's taking engineering and he needs to have that focus. So you take the best receiver and you take your targeted starting quarterback out, you take a big step back. They've done that on offense. Their defense is a little tighter. I think that Michael O'Connor on the road with that offense has to be patient and not pushy. And if you're pushy, you're going to end up with turnovers like that turnover that you referred to on that tip pass in the 4th quarter against Regina. So I think UBC needs to take some time against a team that is typically weak against the run to try to establish the run. This is a good pivot game for the running game and for the offensive line to get on track with the running game, in my opinion.
Well, there you have it. UBC Thunderbirds have their work cut out for them. That's your UBC Report with Jim Mullen. Well, that about does it for us this week at Touchdown BC. Adam, 10,000 fans at Thunderbird Stadium.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see how many people are going out to see the games because, 5 years ago, you might not have seen that many people. But on next week's show, we'll update you on what happened with UBC. Also, conference play starts in BC high school football, and there's a couple great BCFC games. So thanks for watching. Enjoy the games, and we'll see you next week.
Touchdown BC is sponsored by
The Robertson Braun Group, Remax Kelowna. Thinking real estate in Kelowna? Think Blake Robertson, Marlene Braun. For more information, call 250-212-2888 or 250-878-5242.
Touchdown BC is also sponsored by Subway and the Subway Bowl. The Subway Bowl hosts and supports the BC High School Football Championships and amateur football around the province.